Draw two squares slanting to each other and connect their edges on all the four corners. So here we got a cube with 6 sides like middle ear cavity, and the upper surface is roof, lower down floor, anterior surface is anterior wall, behind we have posterior wall, inside we can see medial surface, which means here the lateral wall has been removed. Now moving on to the floor. Floor of the middle ear cavity is formed by a thin plate of bone which separates from the superior bulb of internal jugular vein. Moving on to the anterior wall. In the anterior wall we have two tubes, one below the other, and beneath them the lower part of the anterior wall is related to internal carotid artery. The first tube is for a muscle called tensor tympani, and this is called canal for tensor tympani. This one is the canal for auditory tube or eustachian tube, which connects the nasopharynx to the middle ear cavity. Moving on to the medial wall. So there is a bony extension between two canals in the anterior wall, and this bony extension from the anterior wall, it moves towards the medial wall to form a pulley called processus cochleariformis. The tensor tympani muscle winds around the processus cochleariformis to get inserted into the handle of malleus. Behind processus cochleariformis is promontory. So promontory is due to the first turn of cochlea. Basal turn of cochlea, it produces a bulge in the medial wall of middle ear cavity called promontory. Posterior superior to promontory is oval window. Posterior inferior to promontory is round window. Behind the oval window we have impression for lateral semicircular canal. Just behind the promontory is sinus tympani, that is depression formed due to ampulla of posterior semicircular canal. So this is facial canal which runs between the oval window and the lateral semicircular canal. Moves towards the posterior wall and exits through the stylomastoid foramen. Moving on to the posterior wall. Important structure in the posterior wall is pyramid. Above the pyramid we have communication to the mastoid antrum called adductus to mastoid antrum. This communicates from the epitympanic recess to the mastoid air cells. Beneath the pyramid is posterior tympanic canaliculus, which allows the cauda tympani nerve. And there is a muscle attached to the pyramid called stapedius, which gets inserted to neck of stapes. Here, between this internal carotid artery and internal jugular vein, we have a nerve called glossopharyngeal nerve, and through tympanic canaliculus it gives a branch called tympanic branch. It ramifies over the promontory to form tympanic plexus. Moving on to the lateral wall. So lateral wall is otherwise called membranous wall, which contains mainly the tympanic membrane, and we can see malleus and long process of incus through the tympanic membrane. And here the tensor tympani muscle gets attached to the handle of malleus. There is a nerve related to the medial side of the tympanic membrane called cauda tympani nerve. It enters through posterior canaliculus and exits through the anterior tympanic canaliculus.